Welcome to People Are the Point. I'm your host, Mark Concannon. Let's talk about the people. Hi, I'm Mark Concannon, your host for People Are the Point. Today, we have a special guest. We have Tom Byer, who has, in his own right, created a great reputation for success in soccer as a player and went on to make the Japanese Youth Soccer League and the Japanese soccer environment some of the best in the world. So please, great conversation today about not as much sports as about the impact sports has on people and the value of being a leader.
Well, hi, Tom. Thank you for joining us from Tokyo today.
Yes, it's great to be here.
And you'd recently been on a little tour. Was it the Philippines?
Yes, I just came back from the Philippines. I do travel is my life, let's just say. But I just came back from a 2-week tour of 17 cities in the Philippines on a private helicopter.
Oh, my gosh. That's amazing. Well, you've had such an illustrious career yourself in soccer, and now you've put a lot of your time and energy into helping youth soccer and growing the J League and all just amazing things you've worked on. Can you tell me a little about what got you into soccer originally? What drew you to the sport?
Yes. Well, I'm from New York originally. Go Yankees, by the way, although I'm not a huge baseball fan.
Oh, you ready for Friday?
Yeah, exactly. And so my brother started playing soccer first, a couple of years older than me. And it just so happened that the family that our family was best friends with had 5 boys. And the oldest brother and a couple of the other ones played soccer as well. So that's kind of how things start out, you know. I mean, you've got friends and family, and it really comes down to a lot in the culture as well. But yeah, I started to play when my brother was playing, and I just got into it, and I was pretty good in the beginning. And that was kind of the start.
Oh, it's very humble, pretty good. But that's great. And once you got over to Tokyo, I understand you kind of got in before the really J League got started. And so there was some advantage to being there already as this thing got going bigger. How did you transition from being a player into actually having this tremendous influence over youth?
Yeah, well, let's say when I was growing up in New York, I took an interest very early at coaching. I had a couple of good mentors and a couple of people that I really looked up to that I wanted to emulate. And that gave me that kind of a little bit of hunger of wanting to do similar. So I worked at some soccer camps when I was, I think it was maybe even one of my high school summer years, and then surely during college. And that was at the height of, that was in the late 1970s, early 80s. And so I loved the camaraderie. I loved the coaching, of course, but even off the pitch, as we say, the field of and it's an international sport. So I was early exposed to foreign coaches and players as well, from many different countries. And so that's really what kind of excited me and got me super interested, to be honest.
That's great. What would you credit to? There's many people would say the youth leagues and the overall soccer capabilities of the Japan market are outstripping the U.S. by a good bit. Do you agree that's probably true? Japan's really taken this to heart? And do you think there's an underlying reason why the U.S. maybe hasn't come along this far?
Well, the reality is in America, more kids play soccer than any other sport put together. So what happens is people create these images based purely on the professional game and how the national teams do. And that's not always a reflection of what's happening in the country at the grassroots level. So in America, we've got, millions of kids that play. And, I don't know if it's 50-50, but pretty close to 50-50 is boys and girls. And there's an explosion in girls soccer. We could talk. That's a whole nother talk.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing.
Here in Japan, we have a much lesser kids that play. But the difference is that here in Japan, they're very disciplined. They're very organized. There's no what we call pay-to-play model. That's massive. So the barrier for entering into play soccer here is peanuts. It's just buy your uniform, and that's about it. In America, it could cost you thousands of dollars for one child to play one season. So that's a big difference. On the professional league, the J League, and this is up for argument, but the J League to me is a higher standard level. Here's how you can, and this is my world of development, but this is how I can explain it best. We have the professionals, which is MLS, and I work with MLS as well. And you have the J League. That's the domestic league. Then you have the national team, U.S. national team, Japanese national team. Today, all of the players or most of the players from the Japan national team, they play their club soccer in Europe. Okay? The U.S. national team as well, most of their players play their club soccer in Europe. But here's the difference. The gap between the best players that play in Europe from America and the American players that play in the MLS, the gap is very big. In Japan, it's very tiny. So when you close that gap between the very best and the worst, that's when your elite player pool explodes. So the national team seems to be set up in a much better position here in Japan than it does in the States. So
okay, that makes a lot of sense.
You probably got more than you bargained for.
No, that's really helpful. I honestly, I think I was really excited about today's conversation because of the influence you're having on the youth and the way you're driving the success rate. What you just told me, I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we've gotten her in volleyball, and we have her in club in the U.S. And to your point, it is not peanuts. So I do understand the challenges, not just in soccer, but in other sports as well. Pressure in America to pay for performance and play versus playing for passion. So I think that's a really good, interesting insight that it's different in Japan.
And it really comes down to culture, different cultures in place. What's socially or culturally acceptable in Japan won't fly in America, and vice versa. So when you divide up the countries that play the sport, soccer, which is 211 countries, more than the UN, what divides those countries is their cultures, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. And that kind of brings me to one of my thoughts is, you spent a lot of your adult life in the U.S. and a lot of your adult life now in Japan and Asia. What are some of the big differences that you've had to adapt to for you to have the success in Japan and see these cultural differences? What's worked for you, or what have you noticed?
Well, I came over to Japan nearly 40 years ago. So I actually came over in my early adult life, 24, which is probably still a kid, right? So most of my adult life has been spent in Japan, but I've done a lot of work in America and around the world. My business mentality is much different because here you're dealing with 1/3 of the population. We've got about 120 million people. I don't know what the U.S. is up to, but I think it's over 300 million by now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite a bit bigger. But we live on an island or a couple of islands. So here in Japan, there's nowhere to hide. Okay. So I tell people often that when you do business here in Japan, you have to have an impeccable reputation. You have to be honest. You have to be truthful. You have to hold to your word because there's nowhere to hide. And the reality is that in the U.S., 50 states, and again, grew up in New York, it's very easy to move around. You're very easy to mobilize. If you make a mistake in New York City, just move upstate. Probably nobody's going to find you. If you want to make a drastic change, we'll move over to New Jersey or Connecticut. If you want to change your life and world, move to California. So it's just such a different mentality. So it's easy to hide. But here it's not. So when we do business here, there's not a lot of reality in doing business. It's a lot of effort and time invested in building relationships. So a lot of my contracts over the years, for 40 years, have been with handshakes. And I'm talking about major, major corporations that sponsor me. Nestle Japan, I was with them for 10 years. Canon, I was with Canon Cameras. I was with them for 13 or 14 years. Adidas, I was their football ambassador. So even though these are multinational corporations, they're here in Japan. So they do things a little bit differently. So yeah, communication, the way that we communicate here, Japanese are not direct. They have different cultural code words that they use and mannerisms. I saw the interview with my good friend Ali. Ali was spot on. He understands it because he's been coming here back and forth. He lived here, so he knows what the challenges are. And it is always funny because you could sit in a boardroom with a group that's come from America or Europe or anywhere and sit in the meeting with a Japanese group, and the Western group is pitching some kind of sales pitch or trying to sell. They could literally come away from that meeting wanting to go pop the cork of champagne because they think they got a deal done. And people who actually know and can understand and listen, because the Japanese are very hospitable. So they'll give them presents. They'll tell them what time to show up to the dinner that night. And those are all kind of indicators that things are going really good. But you can figure it out. It's not easy, but it's a different world. And Americans are very, very direct. I'll give you another example. So I was with Nestle for 10 years. They were my sponsor. And I had other brands come to me, other competitors come to me, offering me more money, and substantially more money. And I turned it down because I knew that my key to success here was longevity. And I wanted to be known as the guy that was with Nestle for 10 years, for a decade. I did a TV show here as well. I was with them for 14 years. I did every weekday morning, had no contract, no nothing. I got offered to do other TV as well. I turned that down. So longevity just speaks volumes here, whereas in America, not always, but many will change brands and change allegiances for, a couple extra dollars or more. So that's a big difference too, because again, there's nowhere to hide and your reputation is king here. That's the reality.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Well, as you've gone through these different challenges and changes over the years, are there one or two people that you stand out a little bit that really influenced the way you approach what you're doing now, the things you mentioned now about business and how you've navigated that? Is there anyone who stands out, and how did they shape your approach?
I thought about that. I think about that often, and it's very simple. For me, actually, the biggest impact I had on me, my life, and the way that I approached the sport and the business side of it was from someone in the U.S., a guy named Tommy Mulroy, same name as me. He was a couple years older than me, and without going through the long, huge story, I was born in the Bronx, but my family moved upstate New York, about 2 hours north, in a place called Ulster County. And Ulster County Community College during the 70s was a perennial national powerhouse, back-to-back national champions in junior college. And Tommy Mulroy was a couple of years older than me, and he was a superstar on that team. He was my idol. He was everybody's idol that grew up in that era, like around that area or that team. And I became super close friends with him, even though he was a couple of years older than me. And he was one of, if not the first guy to go from our college into a professional team called the Miami Toros. And I made friends with him, his cousins, and I spent a huge amount of time with him. And he used to do soccer, we call them clinics, where he would go around and he would just promote the game of soccer. It's a little bit different than like just pure coaching. It's kind of almost being a performer. That was the gold bar standard for me. I wanted to be the Tommy Mulroy here in Japan. I copied his show. I did everything. And he means the world to me. And one thing that I picked up and I remember, I get goosebumps. I'm right now thinking about anytime you're with Tommy Mulroy, he never let anybody pay for anything. And the reason why is because we were all younger players, coaches, and it was just this mentality that the oldest, most successful guy takes care of everybody. And to this day, I have stayed with that culture in my life. I've never say never, but very rarely any young coach has ever paid for any dinner or drinking or anything. And I've been around a long, long time. So that stuck with me. And it was just a way to kind of pay it forward type of thing. Yeah. I never forget that from him. And to this day, we stay, and I didn't plan this, but I had a problem. Tommy, this guy, he played against Pele. And the biggest honor,
wow.
The biggest honor you can have is after the game, Pele gives you his shirt. So he wrote this book and I put a big blurb. He asked me to write a blurb in it, which was like a huge honor for me. But yeah, he's very famous in America as well. But that would be the guy that really shaped and molded the way that I approached grassroots soccer. And to this day, you can see, anybody that knows Tommy and knows me, they can see the similarities.
I hear so much of not just the way you approach the grassroots soccer and to drive interest and excitement, but also how you treat the teams and the coaches and the people behind that. That's amazing, Tom.
You have to, I mean, this sport has done amazing things for me, man. I have gone all over the globe. I'm welcomed in parts of the world that many Americans aren't even welcomed in, to be honest with you. And it's all because of soccer. And so I have a deep, appreciation for that, to be able to go on any given day. I could be in contact with half a dozen countries, peoples or more. So it's a wonderful sport that I got involved in, and it's taken me everywhere. So you got to be appreciative, and you have to at least stay in touch with your roots. And I grew up in upstate New York. I come from a very kind of modest family, and had to really work hard to get successful.
That makes a lot of sense. And usually I'd ask you a little bit about, passions or hobbies outside of work, but it really feels like for you, passion is work. You merge these things together. It sounds like maybe it's more, the things you get beyond what you're working on is some of the travel and seeing the world and this access. What is it that you get to be passionate about that maybe isn't core to the business you're working on, soccer and that growth?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a hard question, because I work at this 24/7. Now, it's not always good to say that because people maybe take it the wrong way, but what I'm involved in, I'm so passionate about. Put it this way. I'm 63. I'll be 64 in a couple of weeks. There's a saying when you get older that, you've got more yesterdays than tomorrows, right? No, I've got way more tomorrows than I wake up every morning and get out of my bed. It's like the little kid running to the living room to see what's under the Christmas tree, because guaranteed someone has sent me messages somewhere throughout the world asking about the work that I do. And so it's hard to get away from that, but let's just put it this way. It's so different because I love and I'm so passionate about what I do. How I kind of get away from that is I do have friends that aren't in the business, and that's kind of when I get to turn off a little bit. Living here in Tokyo has been just a godsend for me. This is one of the greatest cities in the world. I don't know if you've ever been here or not, but if you do, sushi, all the sushi you can eat's on me. But this is a wonderful place where it could be one of the, I don't know, I want to say last countries, but this country is one of the best countries in the world where people socialize constantly. So even where I live here in Tokyo, I live right in Tokyo here. I walk out my door, and it's not like I'm in a downtown city, but there's nothing I don't need that I can't walk to around this area. We have some of the best restaurants. If anybody would probably ask me what my hobbies is, it's probably eating food and going to dinners. Japan has perhaps one of the best food in the world. And I'm not talking just Japanese food. Any food that you want, Mexican, Italian. I ate Indian last night. So it's got everything. So I'm a real people person. I stay super, super connected to people. You always have some certain group in your inner circle. But I do a very good job of keeping in very good contact with my network. So that's what excites me, and I have a lot of friends that are not in soccer at all. And that's kind of how I get to turn off a bit.
So it goes to a little bit of, and when you're maintaining these meaningful connections, it seems like soccer is probably easy because you have something shared. These folks in our inner circle maybe aren't soccer. Do you find different commons, or is common interest, or is it because you don't have the common interest? There's a different kind of connection.
Yeah, well, I was lucky because I did television for 14 years. I was casted on a TV show for children. And one of my best friends here in Japan is actually two. I've got a bunch of friends that are super, super famous guys here in Japan that are actors, singers, performers. So I've got this network and Japan's a very small community, although, we've got 115 some odd million people. But I just stay connected, and the common denominators, there's always something, once you get into that kind of circle, whether it's professional sports or it's a show business or it's electronics or engineering, whatever it is, you obviously will have more opportunities to meet people, within that network. But the television part and the entertainment part was very good for me because although I was doing a soccer corner on TV, the people I'm interacting with are not soccer people. The TV show that I was casted on was born out of the Pokemon craze, which is pop culture. Yeah. So I had a soccer corner inside that show, but none of the other people were involved in soccer. So yeah, I've got a good network of both. But yeah, my closest buddies, some of them love soccer. Maybe that's a little bit of the connection too. But it's not. We're not talking about soccer things when I get off. And one last thing too is that because I've been in Japan for 40 years, I had a huge amount of activities work-wise while I was here in Japan for about the first 30 some odd years. Currently, today, almost 99% of all my business is outside Japan. I just live in Japan now. So whenever I work, what I have to take care of here is the management part. I have an office. Sometimes I go there. I've got some guys that help me as well. But I'm not doing the events that I used to do. I'm not doing TV here anymore. I'm not producing DVDs. I'm not going out. So when I'm here in Japan, I'm kind of off for a certain extent. But when I go out to work, I'm on like 24/7. So, for example, like I said, I just came back from the Philippines, 15 days, morning to night, just boom, I'm working. And then next Monday, I'm going to leave for Korea. I'll go to Korea for 5 days to speak at a huge soccer conference, and it'll just be morning to night. So it's not a traditional lifestyle I'm leading, but it seems to be working out.
That's great. Well, obviously, this is taking you all over the world. Have you found, I mean, obviously you love Japan. That's why you're living there. But have you found maybe a second favorite place you really enjoy going to that you try to get back to? Or do you just really enjoy every place you go?
It's funny you say that. So yes and yes. So I've got to give two caveats. So of course I'm American, so I enjoy going back to America now and then. I've got a brother and a sister, but unfortunately they live on the opposite coasts. One's in Atlanta, Georgia. One's in Sacramento, California. You couldn't get too further distances. So family that. But here's my my big thing. This summer, I went to Croatia. And my grandmother's family on my father's side is from a place called Dubrovnik. I don't know if you've ever heard of this or not. This is paradise. I grew up as a little kid hearing about Dubrovnik, the old country, everything. So it's been in the old bucket list as like the number one priority in my life for just not me, myself, my brother, my sister, and my two cousins, 5 of us. And I made it there first. And it was more than I expected. And so I was just talking to someone yesterday on the phone, and we're just talking about, hey, if you ever retired and you went somewhere, where would it be? Well, I love Japan, so this is a great place. But Dubrovnik. You want to go to see paradise? Go to Dubrovnik, Croatia. That place is incredible. And if there's some place that I really, really want to go to plan a vacation, it would be there.
Okay. Actually, it's interesting. Croatia, you're probably the 5th or 6th person in the last 12 months to tell me I'm missing out that I haven't been there yet.
I'm telling you, this is paradise in that area because it's a very unique geography where they've got the Adriatic Sea and it's set on a mountain. I mean, the background is the mountains. The weather is crazy good. The food's there, super clean, super safe. Just, it's beautiful. And it's got history, culture. It's got everything.
Well, Tom, it was great talking today. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm always like to talk about my sister, Renee. My sister, Renee, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 2007 for, that's someone you should have on the show. And she did a book called Living on $1 a Day. She's a photojournalist. So what she did was she went around the world and she documented the plight of extreme poverty. So she's another big role model for me, and as well as my brother. My brother had he was an Air Force. He was in the Air Force and he retired from the Air Force. And so we all come from kind of different worlds, the 3 of us. But we always kind of joke around because my sister and I are the workaholics, and my brother's the retired guy in Georgia living on a horse farm. And we said we recently thought he might be the wise man of the family, actually. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, this was a pleasure getting to chat with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, great.